So good
Hey,
afternoon, everybody, and you're very welcome. We're delighted that you could join us this afternoon, and thanks once again for your patience while we set up. This is the very first public webinar event of our new Teacher Education and Development Research Group here at the School of Education, Trinity College Dublin. This recently established group brings together colleagues, students, and international collaborators to explore pressing issues in teacher education and development. And we see our group as a space for dialogue between research, policy, and practice. And today's talk is the start of a series of conversations we'll be hosting over the coming years. If you'd like to keep up to date with future events, we'll share a link in the chat where you can find out more in a few moments. And now to today's talk. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Simone White, Dean of the School of Education at RMIT University in Melbourne, Australia, who's a leading voice in teacher education and professional learning. Her work focuses on how we prepare and support teachers across diverse contexts, with particular attention to rural, regional, and remote communities. Simone has led major national projects and published widely on teacher learning, policy, and the importance of strong partnerships between universities, schools, and communities. Today, Simone will be speaking on teacher shortages and policy implications in the Australian context, a post-COVID examination. This presentation explores how long-standing challenges in staffing schools have been intensified by the pandemic, leading to burnout, career change, and shifting priorities among teachers. Drawing on Australian Research Council projects and perspectives from principals, teachers, educators, and union officials, Simone will highlight the key factors shaping this crisis and suggest some policy implications we ought to be mindful of. We're so pleased to have her with us, and I'll now hand over to Professor Simone White.
thank you so much, Gavin. It's a pleasure to be here and to spend some time with you this afternoon. Excuse my background. I'm in a hotel at the moment. I'm actually at the RMIT Europe based space, which is in Barcelona. So I'm only 1 hour difference between Ireland and Spain. Luckily for me, if I was at home in Australia, it would be just after 1 a.m. So this was great for me to be traveling in Europe, and later on I'll be going to Bira in England. And so for anyone who might be listening in and also attending Bira, please do come and say hello. I can't see anybody besides Gavin, of course, but what I'll do now is I'll share my screen. I'll go through for hopefully about 20 to 25 minutes of my presentation, hopefully leaving lots of time for some questions as well. So hopefully now the technology is going to work. I'm going to share my screen. And Gavin, is that working?
Yes, we can see that. Yeah.
Okay, I'll move on to presentation. All right, so I like to, so yes, thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm going to talk about teacher shortages, which I know is a global issue. And just to sort of set the scene, whenever I do a presentation, I like to sort of try and see if I can find a sort of a motif, an image, a picture that sort of helps me connect the theories and the ideas. And I thought an apple would be a nice way to sort of link this talk. So you'll see lots of images of apples, and I'll sort of come back to the image of the apple, and obviously an apple for the teacher as we go through. Also, just to let you know, obviously, as Gavin said, I'm the Dean of the School of Education at RMIT, and we're based in Melbourne. We do have international campuses as well in Vietnam and across Europe, here in Spain. And we have a research theme that I think really closely aligns to the work at Trinity College as well, that Gavin is leading. And I know that Associate Professor Kathy Smith also is travelling at the moment in Ireland, and we hope to have connections and synergies as well between our two groups. So as I said, now I'm just going to move the screen that it's blocking my, there we go. A little motif of an apple, just to sort of keep also some interest as you watch the different images coming up. And I thought it might be a nice way for us to talk about this later on in terms of an apple for the teacher. Click. No, why isn't it doing that? The next one. Okay, so as Gavin said, I'm really fortunate at the moment to be working across three Australian Research Council. So they're our largest federally funded projects, the research projects, with different colleagues for the last couple of years. We're getting towards the end, so next year will be the end of these three projects. You can see the names there, I won't read them out. But one project has been focused on career change teachers, and I know that's a particular interest in Ireland, and I will focus this presentation a little bit more on career change teachers. Hard to staff, or as we've now termed hardest to staff, is another area of a focus. And the third project is on precariously employed teachers. So I'm going to sort of draw from those three different projects in different ways in this presentation. And we've written papers, so that I'll share with you some of the papers that are published at the end of this presentation. And I think I'm just very fortunate that all three were funded at the same time, and all in different ways are focused on the teacher shortage. So I know it won't be any surprise to anybody here that we're in a global teacher shortage crisis, and this seems to have accelerated post-pandemic. And I use that time marker as a way for us to reflect, I think, a little bit about what has happened and why the rapid acceleration. And I'll come to that when we talk a bit more about precariously employed teachers. In the Australian context, you'll see there from the Australian Institute for Teaching and School Leadership that it's reported that 35% of the teacher workforce do not intend to remain in teaching. And we had a large exodus actually through the COVID years and post-COVID years. So while we're getting a lot of your actually Irish teachers coming to work with us in Australia, in short, we basically have a very large global teacher crisis, and how are we going to best meet the needs of all children and young people? As I said, you can see there another statistic, I suppose. 9 out of 10 school principals in Australia are saying that they are experiencing a teacher shortage. As Gavin said, a lot of my work has been in the areas of rural and regional and remote, which in particular in Australia has always been hard to staff. Now they are the hardest to staff. The teacher shortage has crept into the cities, into the suburbs. And so now, as I say, 9 out of 10 schools are experiencing some sort of teacher shortage. And there are all sorts of very hard to digest stories actually of principals really struggling to meet the staffing needs in their schools. Some of the reasons, and I'm not going to go right deep into those, but workload and coping, students' behaviour has been another area. Although wages are one aspect, they are not the full aspect of why teachers are leaving. Interestingly, and I think this is anecdotal, and so there's research that we're doing at the moment, many of our graduates are actually looking for much more flexibility and, interestingly, wanting more casualised work. So when we got that project called Precariously Employed, we were really looking at the challenges for those who are precariously employed. It's interesting in the COVID, post-COVID, is that we have people who are choosing precarious employment in the choosing casual relief teaching rather than necessarily looking for a full-time job at this point in time. So again, we're starting to do the research, but this is very anecdotal at the moment. Again, our graduates are looking for greater flexibility than they think that that teaching can provide. In Victoria, where I am, the government is looking at mandating flexible working days so that people can work from home. Teachers cannot necessarily work from home, and so there's some competing and challenges that are also adding to this this teacher crisis. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the Australian policy context, because we've just had a rapid fire of 3 different policy documents. Each one of them has led to, well, many in one way to address the teacher shortage, but in others have actually resulted in some unintended consequences of exacerbating or changing the teacher workforce. And I'm going to sort of talk a little bit more about that. So these are the three different documents. The first one, Next Steps, the report of the Quality Initial Teacher Education Review, was in 2021. So still in the pandemic as such. The National Teacher Workforce Action Plan was in 2022, so not long after. And then the third in the trilogy was Strong Beginnings, the report of the Teacher Education Expert Panel in 2023. So you can see that we didn't have very much time to evaluate or address these quick rapid fire policies, and that's part of the challenge. But I'll sort of talk to you a little bit about how each one focused on a particular area to address the teacher shortage. And I've used the term here from Theodore and Beck in 2015, who used the term fast policy as borderless silver bullets that actually often have unintended consequences. And that's sort of one of the issues that I think is exacerbating the teacher shortage. So with the first policy, you'll see here the teacher shortage was a backdrop. The policy document looked as a solution to identify highly suited people who will want to become teachers if the right levers or incentives are offered. And initial teacher education providers are implicated in the problem in this document, as the basis of the recommendations are that early career teachers need to be better prepared for the classrooms that they should and that they should have the right type of support in their induction. So there was a sort of lot of rhetoric there about always initial teacher education being part of the problem, looking at really incentivizing the right type of people for to come into teaching. In this particular document, they identified particular groups that they really wanted to focus on or target, and they named them in the policy. They named high-performing high school students. They particularly focused on a group called mid-career or career changes in relevant fields of demand. They did identify Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, school leavers and suitably qualified people from rural, regional, remote, noting that that's always been a difficult area to staff, and they were wanting to encourage people from rural, regional, remote to become teachers and stay in their communities, and increasing culturally and linguistically diverse people. So you can see actually the policy was quite broad in terms of trying to attract a whole range of different types of people coming into teaching. But the challenge has been that most of the incentives, particularly the financial incentives and the levers that were pulled for initial teacher education, actually focused on career change teachers. So they were the main group that have been the target of policy. Particularly recommendation 5 in the document says, prioritising the capacity to support the prior learning of well-qualified, suitable mid-career changes with skills in areas of high demand should be better recognised, with the goal of reducing to 1 year the time taken to complete a secondary teaching qualification. Now, this particular policy recommendation did not come to pass. It has not come to pass as such. 10 years ago or more, there was a different policy, Teacher Education Ministerial Advisory Group, the TMAG report, which moved from 1 year to 2 year Masters of Teaching. So we used to have 1 year diplomas, but they were moved to graduate diplomas. They moved to 2 years. At the moment, to undo that and go with this recommendation is too challenging. There were too many requirements that were put in under the TMAG policy agenda. For example, a capstone assessment, teaching performance assessment, particular areas of accreditation that needed to be placed into a Master of Teaching. So the 1 year has not occurred following this particular recommendation. Nevertheless, career change teachers have been the main focus. And I'll come back to them a little bit later. The second policy document that I was telling you about, this time looked at different levers that could be pulled to address the teacher shortage. So if you see the first one there was prioritising visa processing for qualified teachers and prioritising teachers from state and territory nominated visa allocations. So this was very much becoming a work visa rights, and we've had a lot of international teachers come, as I said, mainly from Ireland actually. Another interesting aspect was prioritising conditional or provisionally registered teachers. Now, this happened also in just around the COVID time. So people who normally you do a 4-year degree or a 2-year degree, Master of Teaching or a Bachelor of Education. But what happened was a shift to being able to be provisionally registered as a teacher prior to graduation. So this was a lever that was pulled, particularly in initial teacher education. There was a lot of incentives for what they call employment-based accelerated programs. So as I said, they couldn't move it back to a 1-year diploma, but what they could do is incentivize an accelerated program. And majority of the universities, mine included, have moved towards that type of a program. So it's 18 months, same content, but in a shorter period of time. And no surprises, the majority are career change people who are attracted to these types of employment-based and accelerated types of programs. What else have we got here? They did try to encourage moving away from precarious and casual to permanent. That was a lever that was pulled to try and ensure, to see if that would promote more people to take on teaching and to have a permanent position. Ironically, in a way, as I said, post-COVID, many people are actually choosing not to go down the permanent road of teaching just yet. And what else have we got here? We've got people who have left the teaching profession to come back to teaching. So all sorts of different levers and incentives were pulled in this particular policy. The third in the suite, interestingly, took a completely different direction. I'm not going to go too much into this particular one, but as people may know, in Australia, and it's been documented, that often we follow the policy from either England or the US. And a particular approach to initial teacher education. So in the third policy suite, it really focused on the problem for the teacher shortage was to do with initial teacher education. And if only initial teacher education curriculum could better map what's happening in schools, then there would be a easier transition into the classroom and teachers would stay. Under that sort of argument, they focused on a particular core content or common core that has been introduced in England and has now been introduced into Australia. And it is mandated, and all initial teacher education providers are at the moment, mine included, working hard to ensure that all our accredited programs have got the addition in terms of the 4 areas of the core content. So it didn't really do the same as the first 2 policy documents, as I said, which were more incentivising particular groups, shifting some of the levers that could be pulled between schools and universities and work rights, etc. This one really went back to initial teacher education and said, the core content will be the solution to the teacher shortage. Now, we know that in England, that has not meant that there hasn't been a teacher shortage and that hasn't addressed the issues, but nevertheless, that is where we are at the moment. And so we haven't had a 4th one, so those were the 3, and that's what happened. So we're in a much more diversification of our teaching workforce at the moment as a result of these 3 policies, and we're all at different stages as each one has rapidly been implemented. One of my arguments, and trying to, in part of our research, is trying to better understand that, is who now is a beginning teacher. So the argument is that used to be that beginning teachers were seen from those who had finished their had graduated and were in the first 3 to 5 years of their teaching career. Now, what we're finding is that the beginning stage can be is longer, and it happens earlier, pre-graduation, in that provisionally registered stage. We're also finding that who is a beginning teacher is shifting, particularly career change teachers who are not an homogenous group in themselves and at the stages of their careers and when they're coming in as expert novices as such, at all different stages of life. So we have people coming in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and even their 70s coming into teaching with lots of experience and expertise in their discipline, but not necessarily in teaching. Arguably, people who are coming from international context, beginning teachers, no, but they are beginning in a different type of culture, country, and context. And so I suppose that notion of the needs of these teachers and how to retain them is something that we're now trying to also catch up to policy, because policy has continued to focus on mentoring and mentors as the key driver for retention. And now we've got this widening group of people who are coming into teaching with different and diverse needs at different stages of their life and career that mean a much more nuanced approach in terms of mentoring, induction, and support. So hopefully this is all making sense as we go along. Now, again, as I mentioned, we do tend to policy borrow from England and the US, and there has been a program, as I understand, in England focused on career change teachers, particularly focus. So one of the aspects of the program that we're looking at is what are the implications of having a lot more career change teachers in schools today as they're learning to be a teacher and then when they start becoming a teacher. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. I haven't gone into all of the data collection and the approaches that we've done for the 3 different projects. Of course, we've got papers and things like that to sort of share, but I did want to, because Gavin did say to me that career change were a focus, I thought I'd share with you the research approach to collecting data for our career change teacher project. You'll see over the 3 years, we're looking at initial teacher education, we're looking at schools and systems, and we're looking at career change teachers themselves. And we have conducted year 1 and year 2 data sets there, you can see, with different groups. And we're now into our final data collection stage. We also are doing some longitudinal study where we're looking at career change teachers early coming into the classroom and then what happens to them over the 2nd year and the 3rd year as well. So that just gives you a little snapshot of some of the data sets that we're using. There's a lot of literature into career change teachers, and in one way they have been coined as novice experts. We can see why they are a policy lever. They're an attractive proposition, to policymakers, and I think they have been for quite some time. There is a belief that they bring personal qualities and attributes. They're seen as more mature, more resilient. They have more life experience to bring into the classroom. They're seen as interestingly, with a higher work ethic and a sense of professionalism and responsibility. So it's interesting to sort of think about this cohort broadly, career change teachers, and what that might look like in terms of the support and the reality of them coming into classrooms. So this is just some snapshots of the data that we're finding in this particular project. We're finding that some of the career change teachers so they're coming into the university with quite unrealistic expectations of what it will be like to teach. some are also coming in with unrealistic understanding of the students that they will teach. Based on their own experiences, they think that they will be teaching people like themselves. And so this is an interesting conundrum that we're finding that career changers themselves are talking about, as well as those who are supporting career changers in trying to retain them into the classroom. Also, we have found that career change teachers are not always well received as a pre-service teacher in a school. And here we've started to really now start to look at what differences might be needed, or different types of support that might be needed for mentors when they take on a pre-service teacher who is also a career change teacher. Some schools found career change teachers as a huge asset and have utilised their skills. Anecdotally, we had someone who had been a journalist and worked with television, and she actually used her journalism skills, the fact that she'd been on television, to show children, to show the students in her class where she'd come from before, what she was, what her job was about, and how she believed the importance of stories. And then she was able to relate that to the children, and the children were very like, oh, okay, we've seen what you've done in your life. This is important now, storytelling, etc. So it was interesting for the career change teacher herself to show her own expertise, strengths, and she was able to utilize that. Now, some schools picked that up, whatever the career change teacher brought into the classroom. Others, there was no difference whether they were a career change teacher or not. It was no difference. And in some situations, in terms of the mentor-mentee relationship, particularly the career change teachers talked about that they were seen as threatening, or that they found having a mentor who was younger, I'm stereotyping here, older and younger, but there was more challenges in the micropolitical sort of environment there of the role of mentors. I think so. These are some of the sort of nuances that we have to sort of tease out. The other aspect that I think a lot of the career change teachers talked about is that because they didn't look like a beginning teacher or another career teacher, they were sort of not given any support at all. And basically when they did say, but I'm only in my first, I'm only just starting teaching now, or I've only just started, people, oh, but you don't look like a beginning teacher. And so there was some interesting sort of insights into, here they are seen as a solution to the teaching shortage. They're a very diverse group, and they have a set of needs and issues that arise when they come into the classroom that needs to be thought through more carefully. So in conclusion, and I hope I've gone okay here, what I've tried to do is pretty quickly paint a picture of, we have a teacher shortage, we have policy that is trying to address the shortage, pulling particular levers, and some of those are now being impacted in the classrooms and in our schools, and now we're trying to catch up and address the issues that have been created from some of those policies. So we're getting a much wider, diverse group known as beginning teachers. The notion of precarity is changing. There is a greater diversity under the banner of a career change teacher and what their professional learning needs might be. We have not had any policy shift or focus on mentors, except that mentors seem to be the only lever to support the retention of diverse teachers coming into the profession. I think there needs to be a lot more focus on that. And I think there needs to be a lot more focus on mentor education in partnership with initial teacher education. So these are just some of the papers that have been published to date. We've got a whole other set that are in review at the moment, but this just gives you a little snapshot if you're interested and want to go and find out a bit more about some of the Career Change Teacher project or the Harder to Staff project, and then there's the precarious. We use the American terms there in terms of the substitute teachers, as it went to an American journal. Okay, so Gavin, I think I'm going to stop sharing now. Hopefully I come back. There I am. I can't see anybody besides you, of course, but I welcome any questions that people might have.
Great. Thank you so much, Simone, and thank you for taking us through really interesting, observations here based on your research. I just invite anybody here with us to put a question into the chat or into the question and answer box, and we'll work our way through them. I suppose just maybe to kick us off, Simone, it was a short time slot to get through quite a lot, and there was a whole number of other strands to the work that you've been undertaking as part of your ARC work. So maybe if you had more time, is there any other aspect of your work that you'd like to highlight or share with us while we're waiting for some questions?
Sure. I haven't talked a lot about the hard to staff or the hardest to staff. Again, we've got some real challenges here with unintended consequences, I suppose, of particular incentives that are happening to retain teachers. So we've sort of got principals at the moment who are almost becoming entrepreneurial in their different approaches to retain teachers, almost like individual enterprise bargaining that is occurring to retain teachers. Now, this is then putting pressure on almost becoming a more market-driven, competitive process in retaining teachers, and this is causing even greater challenges for some of the already hardest to staff schools and contexts. So, again, some of these policy levers, incentives and approaches, all, well-meaning, are actually, we're arguing, the more that we look into them, they're creating another world that is, in many ways, perpetuating the teacher shortage and widening the gap, continuing the equity gap for those most disadvantaged. So this is a wicked problem, I think, and a real challenge because, as I said, you saw this 3 sets of policy, all without any time to reflect or evaluate or to check. And we're all in that sort of policy cycle at the moment. To stop and to reflect is really important, and to understand, but we're all just constantly in this sort of this churn, which at the moment, unfortunately, we're not really seeing any major shifts. We have had the government in both federally and at state level have put some incentives that have definitely attracted more teachers because they've given scholarships. So in Victoria, so what we've noticed is it's almost like free secondary teacher education has been provided for the Victorian sector. And so we definitely notice more people coming into teaching under that sort of incentive. But it'll be interesting to see what happens to that bit of a bump in the sort of the numbers as such, but what actually happens there. The government this year for next year is now saying, well, we don't want to have across the board. We only want to have scholarships now in particular areas of need, mostly in secondary STEM or science and maths, the 2 areas. So this will be, again, some interesting insights into, well, what does that look like? And what does that mean for primary, given that secondary has been the focus and not primary? So again, every lever that's pulled, there becomes another issue that we need to solve.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose in many respects that also points to the importance, given the churn for policy, of evaluation. I'm aware that many of the incentives, if you like, whether it's a localized incentive or a systemic one, whether it's accelerated programs, the changes to the curriculum, kind of, I suppose, financial incentives. Many of these haven't been really thoroughly evaluated, Simone. Is that fair to say? I was reading a piece on this yesterday.
Yes, I think that is fair to say, and it does take time
Mhm.
to to see who takes these up, where do they go, what does it look like, what's the consequences for those. As I said, some of the incentives. Teachers are in an environment at the moment. They're very discerning about where they want to go. They know that there is a teacher shortage, which is, and then, so therefore saying, well, what will you give me? What
Mhm.
opportunities do I have if I come to your school? It's a different mindset than before, and I think it's risking that collective teacher professionalism that we've always had as a stalwart of teacher education and teaching. So, but yes, definitely, I think it's important to evaluate and to check, and that's why as a research team on those 3 different projects, although we got them independently, it's quite interesting to see some of the synergies across the three different areas.
Right. I'm just going to turn to the Q&A, which I believe is the one that's functioning. Apologies again. I think for some people chat may be disabled, but Q&A is working. So just on the point of some interventions, a question from one of our participants in the room, Simone, is around insights you might have on some interventions that have proved quite successful or maybe even promising in increasing the availability of teachers.
Well, that financial one, I think, has definitely worked. Another financial incentive at the moment is paid placement.
Mhm.
So in Victoria, again, the Victorian state has probably led the way, has recognised what they call placement poverty, particularly for nurses, social workers, and teachers, that when they have to go into a classroom or a school for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever amount of time, they have to give up part-time jobs. They might have to relocate to do their professional experience, etc. And so there've been a number of financial incentives to pay per diem an amount. That I think has been a bit of a game changer.
Mhm.
One of the challenges, and again, whenever you put financial incentives, it sort of drives people in certain ways. So paid placement, I think, is fantastic and much needed and appreciated. At the moment, depending on where you go for your placement, you could get more money per day. So, for example, if you go to a community that's, for example, more remote, further away from the city, you get more money per day. In one way, to account for the fact you might have to be using accommodation, more travel, etc. But what we've found is that pre-service teachers are being discerning around, well, okay, well, I want that particular type of opportunity. Whether their motivation to work in a rural regional community is their incentive, or if it's because of the greater amount of money.
Mhm.
Again, that needs more time to really get it right, to ensure that the wrong that the right motivations are the ones that are sort of
Tapped into.
moving people around, if that makes sense. Yeah. But
Sure.
that's been an interesting intervention. I think the Australian government, and as I said, I'm using my own state of Victoria, has really tried to put the money where things were needed. So as I said, free secondary teacher education, um, paid placements, and then scholarships on top of that. It's a
Right.
huge amount of
Mhm.
financial incentives, and we have definitely seen it in terms of the numbers who are coming into teaching.
Yeah.
It doesn't. I don't think it will address the teacher shortage completely, and obviously it's a huge financial commitment from the state. How long can they sustain it?
Mhm.
So now they're focusing on particular areas of need.
Right.
But I
Uh,
do applaud the Australian government for doing this. Yeah.
yeah. I suppose one other intervention, if you like, or an approach to address supplier shortages here has been upskilling programs. in particular subjects for teachers who are maybe somewhat qualified in the area and then wish to kind of become actually qualified in STEM, for example, languages, as is the case in Ireland. I suppose, have they been part of a policy response in Australia, Simone?
Not specifically, although there has been a lot of teacher professional development opportunities, but it hasn't necessarily been like incentivized to take up particular programs. The reality is a lot of our teachers are teaching out of field into those harder to staff subject areas. So that has been occurring. And then I suppose schools are taking it upon themselves to provide the opportunities for teachers to have that professional development. But no, that hasn't been a particular one. As I said, the government was trying to recruit or bring back people who had retired or who had left teaching for whatever reason. And so there was that type of incentive to try and bring them back into the classroom and to upskill them or to refresh their skills in that way. That was one. And as I said, attracting international teachers into schools as well.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Another question, Simone, here relates to the underlying causes of supply issues in Australia. And this question is asking, for example, is it competition with other professions, perceptions of the profession? They're wondering what came through in your research as some of the root causes.
Yeah. I think a couple of things have been a challenge, is that the public perception of teaching, the respect for teachers has been declining over many, many years. And interestingly, there was a spike at COVID when people were sort of seeing the dedication, the amount of effort, the support that all teachers were giving to children and young people, so that it went up, but it seemed to be quickly forgotten as soon as things went back to sort of a form of normal. So I think a lot of teachers reflect on the fact that they just really want that professional respect and from the public. Money is an aspect, I suppose, but it's not the main driver. Professionalism and the ability for teachers to be professionals. At the moment, we've got also another strange set of interventions that are coming down. For example, under the guise of, addressing teacher workload issues, there are scripted lesson plans coming. Teachers don't necessarily want to have a scripted curriculum or a scripted lessons. They want that ability to craft lessons that will be appropriate for their children, their learners, their families, their context, etc. So that lack of capacity to be a professional, to be creative, is a challenge. I think, is particularly, again, post-COVID, people said, if I can't have my creativity, why would I want to be a teacher? I don't want to be robotic in the ways in which I'm teaching. And then, as I said to you, and this is not deeply researched yet because of the timing, but this notion of flexibility. And we have got some schools in Australia that are starting to do more job share, do more part-time work. They're starting to sort of try and meet the workforce needs. But this seems to be a bit of a game changer when so many more people are able to work more flexibly during their career and work from home. Teachers are sort of saying, well, what does that look like for me? So these are some of the things that are sort of causing, I think, the underlying issues of why people are also not necessarily staying in teaching. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. One other question here, Simone, I guess, is commenting again on our own context where we do have a Masters of Teaching scenario for those that do consecutive teacher education. Some might say or argue that, this has been contributing or the contributing factor to a teacher shortage, that it discourages people from undertaking what was a one-year program. And I suppose the question here touches on whether or not research has been done in Australia to assess the benefits of moving to a two-year program. I suppose one thing we can say in beginning a response to that is we know from colleagues in the US that really short-term crash course approaches certainly don't work anyhow. And perhaps that opens up discussion for whether 2 years is a
That is a
problem.
really interesting question. And as I said, TMAG was Teacher Education Ministerial Advisory Group, was 2014, I think it was, that recommended we move from a 1 year to a 2 year. Now, did they know then that this might actually create more of a teacher shortage? I'm not sure. I think a lot of people, as you say, have said that how can you possibly learn in 1 year? We do need the 2 years. And I think anecdotally, again, there was a lot of principals sort of saying you could really tell the difference. That's anecdotally.
Mhm.
But now here we are. And it was very interesting, as I said, in that policy to sort of see that, oh no, let's go back to a 1 year, but it's impossible to go back to a 1 year at the moment without the a lot of the assessment aspects built in being pulled apart, and I don't think the government is interested in doing that because there's been so many hurdles put into place in that 2 year. So then their answer was, as I said, the accelerated 18-month very fast, using winter and summer periods to fast track and move into employment based, so internships in the final semester. So there's been different types of approaches. I think done well. The accelerated and the employment base can work really well if you've got a really good partnership with the initial teacher education. But it's very interesting. Did it actually hasten the teacher shortage crisis? I think that's a really interesting thought.
Mhm. It does, though, link, doesn't it, to the question of what attracts people to teaching. And you made the point that it's creativity, probably a sense of professionalism. And we have to wonder that if you shorten that and then you maybe look towards a future of scripted lessons, then that's possibly an unintended consequence of just paring it back.
Yes. I think this is the message that there's so many unintended consequences. Everybody is genuinely trying to do their best, I think. And look, I mean, this policy borrowing is challenging as well because we do have, I've likened it to, so for us in Australia, following England and the US, we have got evidence, research to show some of the interventions or the research of what's happened after putting them in for 10 years, and yet we still follow them, knowing the consequences of what's going to happen in the next 10 years. So it's and then we have the next policy to solve that problem that was actually created. So we're in this. It would be really good if we could take the best of what we can see coming down the road. And I'm not sure if I'm right, Gavin, but does Ireland then look to Australia
I
in
mean,
terms of policy?
I probably in part, I guess when you look at Australia, it's diffuse across states anyway. But there is a sense of an outward looking approach. But Ireland, I suppose, has a very strong and rich history of its own approach to education. It has made this decision to move after an international review in 2012 towards our current context, and there isn't signals that we're going to change that, notwithstanding the challenges that we face. Um, I suppose, Simone, maybe before we finish, just two other points, because I'm conscious of the time. One is this notion of mentoring, and it actually links to the second question I'll touch on in a second, which is around substitute teachers, which just I feel captures some of the other work you did that we didn't get maybe so much to talk about today. So mentor education, you truly believe, in reimagining this and probably bolstering this. So I suppose, what else would you like to share with us about just how important this is as part of an agenda to help us address this teacher recruitment and retention challenge?
Yeah, I think one of the difficulties in the policies that I was describing is that although they've been sort of focused on all these widening the, who's going to come into teaching and all the financial incentives, etc., mentors just continue to be the one main solution to supporting teachers coming in. And because of the depletion of the teaching workforce, majority of those more experienced people are in the classrooms anyway. And so the capacity for mentors to mentor is incredibly challenging. What I hope and wish, and what we're trying to do in initial teacher education, is for us not to be seen as a problem, but to be part of the solution, and to have that focus on mentor teacher education seen together, rather than just for schools to have to deal with. So that's a sort of space I think that if we can get it right, initial teacher education can, or teacher education can contribute significantly to supporting not only the recruitment but the retention of teachers at all stages of their careers, including those who are experienced and asked to support the next generation, and yet they need that replenishment themselves. So that's the sort of space I think that could be much more exciting and reinvigorating for teachers as well, when they're feeling quite challenged by the workforce situation, and giving them that sense of renewal again. And that's why I think the Master of Education, or that on lifelong learning of teachers, is so important. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I suppose it acknowledges too the work of mentors as kind of informal teacher educators in many
Exactly.
respects. And the fact that the knowledge required to do that is really a meta profession. The skills for teaching children and young people don't necessarily transfer to those required for mentoring, particularly
Exactly. Yes.
as it diversifies more.
Yeah, I haven't talked about any of that, but school-based teacher educators and university-based teacher educators working together, and that professionalization of that status of a teacher educator. And then there's a whole lot of research around the skills and knowledges for that particular profession or group. Exactly.
The final question, I guess, also touches on mentoring in a way, and this actually takes me back to when I heard you present at ESER in Glasgow with Martin Mills and other colleagues. I think about the systematic review you had completed around substitute teachers, and we all have possibly notions about what a substitute or a casual teacher might be. And this paper challenges us to reimagine that, and even the implications it has for mentoring and so on. So just maybe, Simone, if you could share a couple of points that you found kind of surprised you or challenged maybe your own assumptions or the team's assumptions as you conducted that work.
First of all, substitute or casual teachers are vital to the teacher workforce. I think that there has been a sort of perception that they were sort of in this limbo land waiting for permanent employment, and therefore were in this casualized pool. But I think the research is showing that this is an important workforce with its particular needs, a different set of needs than, say, a permanent classroom teacher, but not lesser than, which I think has been a perception. And so that recognition, I think, it is key. And once you get your head around that they're a vital, important part of the ecosystem of teaching, of the teaching workforce, then all of a sudden the mentoring, the support changes. At the moment, the research that we're doing, unfortunately, is showing that the type of induction that precarious teachers are getting is very limited. It's very technical. Here's your key. Here's a timetable. Off you go. But if more and more people are choosing this type of work, and if we think about raising the professionalism of this particular type of workforce, then the professional learning needs to be much deeper. and valuing, I think, given that majority of children and young people have, I haven't got the stats in front of me, I'm sorry, but it's over the period of their teaching, of their lives, significant, casualized teachers are significant in their education. So that's something that we need to really think differently about.
Thank you so much, Simone. And just to say that in our Q&A, everybody has just been complimenting what was a wonderful presentation, and we're really all grateful. So thank you so much, and apologies again to you and to the group with us here today about those technical blips at the start. But we got there in the end, and it was really wonderful. And thank you for being so generous, both before today and for spending, an hour with us as you're busy and traveling already.
It's been my great pleasure. I've really, it's always a bit tricky when you're just talking. I mean, obviously, I've had you there to see when you can't see your audience. I wonder if I might be able to get a record of the questions and things. I'm more than happy to sort of to have a look and see what I can do to answer anything as well. And I do encourage people, if they want to come and talk to me at Vera or just connect with me, simone.white@rmit.edu.au. It's so important, and I highly respect the work of the Irish teacher educators and colleagues as well. So thank you so much, Gavin, and everyone for the opportunity.
Thanks, Simone, and thank you to all of our guests as well today. I know that you're really busy and it's late in the day, and we really appreciate you being here. Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye.
Bye bye.